My name is Julasha Simpson. I'm going to be your moderator today. What our goal is, more than a protest, what we want to do is come up with a strategic plan to help our community change legislation and the way the world is currently working so that we too can live plentiful, happy lives. So I have a panel of beautiful experts here ready to discuss, get into the nitty gritty with you all about what we need to do in order to create change. Just to kind of give you an idea of how this is going to work. We're going to introduce certain topics. Our panelists will chime in on them. Please feel free to leave a question in the comments, and we will be answering your questions as we go. So be sure to participate. We want this to be very collective, and we want everyone to feel very included in this session. This is just the first of many conversations that we want to have, but we want these conversations to turn into action. And so you'll notice that throughout our conversations, we're going to talk about key action items that everyone can participate in. So let's just start off by introducing our panelists. If we could start with Ms. Terri Hodge.
Hi, everyone. I'm Terri Hodge, a veteran and a podcast co-host for Access Is. My background is in mental health, specifically substance abuse, and I have an immense allegiance to teaching and helping people. Locally, I'm a tutor for adult learners that trying to achieve their high school education, feeding the citizens of DC. Prior to relocating to DC, I resided in Hampton Roads, where I worked with different homeless shelters for women and participated in feeding the community, different community service programs. And up here, I also assist with the needle exchange program, different visiting centers to senior citizens, and the yearly Special Olympics. I definitely have a heart to help and improve our community.
Thank you, Terri. And Derrex, if you can give us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Derrex Brady. I am a husband with my wife, 23 years, been married. I have 4 sons, and I'm an actor, writer, producer. I work with my producing partner, MD Walton, for Skyscope Pictures, and our goal is to share unique stories that help people have conversation with a mass appeal, so that there's dialogue from angles that they might not have seen or heard. I'm a humanitarian and want to participate through my talents to help create change.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Mark?
Hello, my name is Mark Jefferson. I'm the assistant professor of homiletics, fancy word for preaching, at the Virginia Theological Seminary here in Alexandria, Virginia. I majored in political science in Norfolk State, have my master's in divinity, my PhD from Emory University. So my interests are in the intersection of religion and politics, faith in the public sphere, and the ways in which being Black is interpreted in these spaces. And so I'm glad to be with you all today.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. We appreciate it. And Yasmin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yasmin Salina from PG County, Maryland. I have a background in politics and entertainment. So currently I am the co-founder and executive director of the Hustlers Guild, which focuses on STEM and arts education for the lower 40% Black and brown students across the country. So our job is to expose and educate them to STEM opportunities through stuff that they do on a day-to-day.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jasmine. And we also have a Jasmine on the panel. Jasmine, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Raysor, and I am a qualified mental health professional in the state of Virginia. I got my master's in forensic psychology at the George Washington University and my bachelor's in psychology as well at the University of Arizona. Right now, I'm working full-time at several nonprofits and also a county government organization, primarily doing crisis intervention, management, and treatment planning for individuals with severe mental illnesses, co-occurring substance use disorders, and histories of homelessness. So I'm primarily here just to talk about, eliminating the stigma against mental health and how we can all really practice self-care to maintain our mental health during this really stressful and traumatic time.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. And last but definitely not least, we have Mr. Jack, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. First and foremost, thank you for the invitation. My name is Jack Monell. I'm an Associate Professor of Justice Studies at Winston-Salem State University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Go Rams. And my professional training encompasses criminology, sociology, and social work. I'm a jack of all trades. Quite frankly, I balance a lot of things between my research, my activism, and my time with my family. I do enjoy ensuring that that the justice system engages in equitable treatment of all, and that's something that's quite passionate to me. And the current times, more than ever, have been something that I've been very busy with the last few weeks, last few months, last few years. So I look forward to engaging with my colleagues on here.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you all for joining us here today to talk about topics that are so important to our community. A lot of people don't realize how local legislation can really impact your everyday life. I think a lot of people think, well, I vote, for the presidential election or whatever, and, we should be fine. But we all know that the real power lies in our local government. So we want to make sure that we are holistically taking care of our community. And this conversation is just like the first step to making that happen. So the first thing I want to dive into is like figuring out what the issues actually are. And like, let's get to the root of those issues so that we can solve those problems. So Jack, I know that you're very well versed in, what's currently going on. If you could dive into what some of those issues, what those key issues are to you, and kind of give us a breakdown of what we need to be fighting against.
Thank you. So I mean, what we're seeing today, I mean, unless you really, really have not been paying attention, we've had protests the last several weeks as it pertained to the unfortunate death of George Floyd. And so the globe, not just the country, has been responding through various protests and activism and legislation to address the police brutality we oftentimes see. Where I do realize that is one instance of our issue systemically. That's just only one of many. We still deal with inequalities across the board, as it pertains to health equity, as it pertains to voter suppression. Right here in North Carolina, for example, we deal with voter suppression, gerrymandering, and individuals really trying to stop the vote, per se. And then, of course, we have educators in the room. Once again, we continue to see a misrepresentation of access or inability to provide equal access to education to school systems that I guess represent maybe your lower socioeconomic demographic. So there's a lot of areas that we need to cover legislatively, which we'll cover later on in this panel discussion. But we need to ensure that we work towards ensuring that our voices are heard. And I think that's what you're seeing with the protests, right? Protests are the outward expression of inner oppression. So, where you have everyone out there, criticizing or being critical of the protesting, albeit peaceful or more extreme or violent. The reality of it is that as a community, we have been oppressed. And as any bottle keg, you shake it enough, it's going to explode. So it is my hope that with the pressure we're placing on the country, per se, that legislators will respond appropriately and ensure that, once again, the equitable access of resources are provided for all of us, and particularly for our future.
And just to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying, I love the fact that you're using the word equitable, because I think for a long time, we've been fighting for equality, but equality isn't necessarily what's going to get us where we need to be, because we started behind the finish line, right? And so when you think about like generational wealth within the Black community versus like the white community, when you're talking about access to education, all of these things, everything that we need, it costs money, and we can't get to that equitable status when we've given so much of our labor for so many years without having the proper head start. So I think you're right, like equitable access is key in us like really propelling this forward. But you also touched on voter suppression, and I kind of wanted to dive into that a lot, especially since Georgia had so many issues with their primary this last week. And actually, Stacey Abrams was very vocal about the issues that are going on in Georgia. I don't know if everyone is actually familiar with what voter suppression is. So I don't know if any of you want to chime in a little bit on that issue.
Chime in now. So we're seeing voter suppression in a lot of different ways. Some of it is, as Jack had spoke about, the different gerrymandering. They're now closing polling places. You're now not able to vote. You've been voting for 30 years. Now you're not able to vote. You're seeing a variety of different avenues of voter suppression. And collectively, it's displaced thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that are now unable to vote. The number one thing that I always suggest now that we're seeing how they keep changing the rules and how they're going to keep trying to fight to win is that you need to check your voter status. And I'm talking about checking maybe every couple of months, only because they're fighting dirty. They're no longer fighting, well, they are fighting with the letter of the law. They're changing the law so that they can continue to win. So it's not just go out and vote. We have to do that, but we also have to stay one step ahead. I like to keep saying that they're playing chess and we're playing checkers. We now have to play chess with them. We've got to meet them where they at. And right now they're saying, hey, by any means, we're going to change the rules so that you cannot win. We have to stay up on these rules and laws. When we see that, we saw it in Wisconsin, we're now seeing it in Georgia. Okay, the next states that are coming up are Texas. What you need to do is make sure that you do have the identification to vote. No, you're not supposed to need it, but they're going to keep changing the rules. Make sure you have maybe 2 forms of identification. Make sure that you know where you're going to vote at. Make sure you have a ride. If you can get a caravan of people, you guys collectively go together. Make sure you go early. If you have to take the day off, go early so that if you do have to stay there for 6 hours in line because they've only got one polling location for the next 30 miles, that you have the time and opportunity to do that. They're going to change how you're going to be able to vote. You've got to be able to meet those changes.
And Terri, she hit that nail right on the head, because between once again the southern states, particularly in North Carolina, she talked about ID. Well, that's one of the ways they try to suppress our vote here, is that they initially passed laws where you needed some sort of government ID. Well, if any of you recall our history, I grew up in New York City where none of us had a license. I didn't get my license until I knew I was leaving the state at 21 because I needed to drive. They're saying if you don't have a license, you can't vote. So once again, and if you look at the elderly population in our community historically, you talk about the 50s and 60s, you saw that was a major way they suppressed the vote back then. Even with competency tests, you had to pass a test to be competent to take a vote. So, all of these things, she's right. Unfortunately, we are playing catch up, and we do like the immediate checkers result. But reality is we got to play chess, y'all. We got to do better as a community in order to stay abreast of all of this stuff.
And so one thing that I was thinking that we really need to have, because I think a lot of people in our community will sign up to register people to vote. Like that's something that you see at the library all the time. At every community event, we're always signing people up to register to vote, but there's no real network or like place online where you can find out where your polling place is, where you can find out the different ways that you can actually place your vote. And so I think that we need some sort of online database that will actually collectively host that information, because registering to vote is just the first step, right? I was like thinking about Georgia a lot, and one of the major issues that they had was like changing polling places or closing polling places because of COVID-19. And like, obviously it's not safe for people to be in large groups trying to go to a polling place to vote. A lot of these states have not included, or a lot of the people that asked for an absentee ballot, they didn't receive them. So it's like all of these people that didn't get their ballots or that received their ballot, but there was an issue with it and now we can't take your vote, like all of those votes count. And so when someone comes up against something like that, a lot of people are just like, well, I guess I'm not going to vote this time. I'll vote next time. So we need a network, I think, of people or a network online that'll show people alternatives to your standard polling place or alternatives to their absentee ballot, because a lot of people get that first wall up initially, and then they're like, okay, well, I guess it's just not gonna happen this time. Have you guys noticed that too?
Yeah, I've noticed that, and I think one of the things I feel like has been benefited through social media is we have collectively started to raise our voices and really share about when the dates are coming. And I think the more that we can kind of put that ahead so that the younger voters are aware and not thinking last minute, we can really get prepared. The primaries in California, for my wife and my kids and I, they changed the polling place last minute. And, thank the Lord we were on it and we were ready. But I can imagine when I was 18, 19, first year voting, and I would have just been like, oh, I think that obstacle could have paused me. But I think we got to continue to put the word out and let people know. And it also adds to, the whole our vote's not important or it doesn't count. No, they would not be using so much energy to stop, oppress, close, change, shift, move if our vote did not count. And so I think it's really important that we continue to collectively let people know, like, this is the date that's coming. Have you registered to vote? Where is your polling place? What is your transportation? Like you said, I love the carpool thing if you don't, but I think collectively we're starting to bring more awareness, and it's really important.
Tapping on to what Juju and Derek both said, I'm going to say that you can find out where you're polling. I'm sorry, Julasha, I forget. This is a professional sign. You can go online. You go online, look at your board of elections for your state, find out where you're going. And Derek said an important thing. On our podcast, we constantly post access is, because access is opportunity and education. You've got to know. And if I know, I'm going to post it online. So now Derek knows that, hey, this is where you go for your new polling station. You can find out. You can find out now. So if Derek doesn't find out until the last minute, I was able to post it online. Now we have a connected network. We do have avenues to find out. Now you're right. You're absolutely right. They are going to keep playing dirty. And now it was open today, but tomorrow at 8 a.m. it's closed. We've got to stay in the know. We've got to stay connected, and we've got to keep educating ourselves. It can't just be one person and I'm gonna just keep hoarding all this knowledge because I know I can go on the Board of Education for Virginia. I assume every state has the same thing. If we don't, we need to now force our local legislation to do that. Local legislation is key. I apologize, but we've got to keep forcing these people to do better. And if it's not them, then we need to get in the seat and we'll do better.
Right. I think a big part of a lot of our issues is, like, a lot of people say, we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, things like that. But you hit the nail on the head. We also have to keep each other informed. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we need a trusted network to help get the information out in real time. So I'm just going to put that on our action plan because I think that's really important in growing. But as far as like local level politics, I think a lot of people don't really understand how local level politics actually affects their day-to-day. A lot of these laws that are being enacted because of these crimes that are being committed by the police departments across America, those city councils have way more power than the president even. To kind of give you guys some background, I'm from Phoenix, Arizona originally. I keep a strong eye on what's happening in my community because my family's still there. And because of the action and the protests that they've been making there in Phoenix, there was actually a civilian review board put in place to actually review the conduct of the Phoenix Police Department, which has one of the highest number of violent acts against civilians in the country. And so I thought that it was so easy for them to put that into place, but people didn't really realize or pay attention to what was happening locally before. to know that that was even something that we could do. So that kind of takes me into our next topic of mechanisms to educate our community and other people so that we can know what's going on in the community. I think someone that would be really good to chime in on that would be Mark.
What I've noticed as a professor, as a clergy person, as one who travels about talking not only to African Americans, but people of all types, is that there's a general ignorance in the ways in which our country works. There's a general ignorance in how we have been essentially sold, right? So as African Americans, we are essentially the stuff of the American industry. So whether it's the prison, from the school to prison pipeline, where we create jobs for rural places and municipalities, so many institutions in this country that help to give our country the economic boost and the vitality that it claims, is because of the direct exploitation of African Americans. And so that general ignorance allows people then to function in ways that don't really achieve systemic change. So what we're noticing is that during these times of social upheaval, people rioting and looting, if you will, they are beginning to start the motions of what it means to be more socially engaged. Many of them have found themselves frustrated by seeing generations of people pursue the vote, and the vote didn't necessarily materialize anything. So on one hand, there is the education that comes from those people who went to school, and we've been well versed in American mythology and the ways in which we've been taught that the system functions. But then there's also a perspective from the streets that says, though these particular aspirations are lofty indeed, there's other ways of perceiving the world that have been left to kind of be addressed on the sidelines. And so what we're seeing is that people are engaging their bodies and they're taking out their frustrations because they're realizing there's something afoot, that the story isn't quite making sense. And so this is a great opportunity for us to begin to connect the dots between how does someone being born in this particular hospital send them already on a trajectory that will have them in this particular penitentiary in about 17 years, right? And so it's for us an opportunity to understand, how does the economic system work? How does the political system work? How does our city system work? And how can we begin to put pressure upon those who make decisions that put pressure upon us? So I think this is a great time for us to begin to pool our collective resources, knowledge and wisdom and experience and the like, to begin to tell a more textured story of America so that we can begin to be more direct about the forces that we're trying to engage. I think there's a lot of wasted energy in misdirection. And so I think we fight the man and all this kind of broad ambiguity, but when we begin to name systems and name persons who are propagating these types of injustices, I think people will be more engaged in the political system and other forms of quote unquote more legitimate protests.
Quick question, Mark. You use the term rioting and looting, and then you're saying, or make sure that I understand, are you saying that the protests you think are not a legitimate form of, again, protesting the system that are actually in place? Or are you saying that there's a better way to do that? And if so, what do you think would legitimize it then?
And the reason why I say it with hesitation is because I've seen much consternation amongst Black people. We're not even talking about other people, around the ways in which there are quote legitimate and illegitimate forms of expression. What I've come to realize is that white supremacy grabs power and maintains power and extends power through illegitimate and legitimate forms of that usage. So what I'm saying is that it takes all of these efforts to bring about change, because politics does not respond to just your vote. Because people voted in 08 and they voted in 12 and they came out and they didn't see anything. So they're going to still express themselves. The body politic will still speak, but it may not be in ways in which people who are accustomed to more middle-class forms of political engagement, they may not be comfortable with that. But it takes all of that to create at least the action needed to bring about some sort of change. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Jack, do you think that we illegitimize the protest then because we're saying it's illegitimate? If everything is as a collective legitimate form of me not being happy with this system, how can I then, to me, I'm now buying into the fact that I can only vote. I can't actually go and burn this city down because I feel like we need to burn it all down.
Right. My dissertation work looked at the influence of W.E.B. Du Bois and the concept of the talented 10, and how this concept of an educated class of African Americans that will lead Black people into to a form of integration and assimilation that will work best for them has been a long-standing myth, and institutions have been built to sustain that. And so what you're seeing is that people are finding frustration with many of these institutions, NAACP and the Urban League, and these types of institutions that weren't even started by us in their essence. Essentially, they're finding people questioning the legitimacy of these institutions. Therefore, the question of what is legitimate is starting to bubble up in ways in which people have not necessarily taken to be as important. So now people are realizing, well, the looting that we're seeing in the street is coming from the looting that we're seeing from Wall Street, right? So if you take $8 trillion away from people, people are going to break into a store so they can sell a $600 bag, right? But we shame the bag stealer, but we don't shame the politicians who have robbed these young people of any type of economic viability.
Come on.
So, Brother Mark, you definitely clarified that last piece. And I think the word illegitimate kind of took me aback, just because I'm a social justice professor. And the one thing I will say is that, and I learned this from my own studies and training, and my colleague who happens to be a Black Panther in my department, is that there's no one way of protesting. And there's no, as the late Fidel Castro once said, a revolution is not a bed of roses, man. So the reality of it is you're oftentimes always going to have a battle between the future and the past, to the second part of the quote. And what you find is you have this group of individuals who have made it, maybe, however we define success in our society. And they see individuals who maybe have not made it, and their maybe their inability or maybe their ability to just channel their energies in that manner are not always widely acceptable or received. And I think that's my issue when many Monday morning quarterbacks, they have something to say about our protesting. And I'm like, we did the knee thing. Y'all didn't like that. Now we marching. Y'all don't like that. Now, and I don't like to use the word looting. Now they wrecking stuff. Now y'all don't like that. Well, answer me this, because I'm not the smartest guy on the panel, right? Then how do we protest? You want us to protest on Zoom? That's what they want. Protesting change is not comfortable. And this is making people very uncomfortable today. And I'm all for it. I'm out there with my students marching and protesting with my wife and my family or whoever. Because the reality of it is today, if we don't maximize on this momentum today, man, we all gonna be talking about this in another 5 years, man. So I agree with you, brother. And to the talented 10th, and I'm a big Du Bois guy myself, obviously. But the reality of it is, and he said this back then at the turn of the 20th, he said exactly what our community will be dealing with today as it pertains to status, wealth, and class within ourselves. I'm a project kid. My thing, I've never fronted about my accolades. I've had more failures than successes, but we need to continue to pound the pavement and be in the positions we are to make that change. So it's a balance of both. Kind of being humble to know who you are, but using our blessings to push for social change.
One of the questions that I raised, not only to my well-meaning white ally colleagues, to some of my more conservative thinking African Americans, and some of my way left Black folks, and all the folks in between and excluded, is what is the goal? African Americans, we've conflated goals over the course of history. So the goal was, when we were in chattel slavery, the goal was freedom. And then from freedom, the goal was then what? Was it going to be us living by ourselves, or was it going to be some form of assimilation? And so the goals were kind of being tugged by different leaders in different directions. But the overall theme that began to win out through many different course of means was assimilation. Well, once the goal is assimilation, it's very difficult to try to call some sort of Black power, because if one assimilates so much, one can assimilate to the point that they have disintegrated. And so the question that we're at now is, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we after Black power? Is this African power? Is this justice for everybody? Because being unclear about what we hope this will be means that the likelihood of us coming up short in our ask and in our demands is greatly increased. So if we're not looking for systemic change, like the entire economic system of the world has been built upon the exploitation of Black people and Black lands. If we're not calling for the systemic change of this entire thing, it doesn't matter if Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO of Chase Bank, takes a knee, right? That doesn't mean anything. So I'm hoping that we have a vision for the future that is not just short-sighted. Because
the symbolism, yeah, brother, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, if people will give you and make these types of changes in 6 weeks, that means they could have made them 6 years or 60 years ago. So I don't want people to take the low-hanging fruit and assume that change has been made. So if we have an overarching vision for ourselves, whoever ourselves is, I think that'll keep us, hopefully on the right path.
Agreed. I'm gonna let her move forward. Definitely well said, brother. Well said.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you said everything that I wanted to say. When you look at all of these companies making these posts on Instagram, we stand with you. How many of those companies have leadership that is diverse, right? How many of those companies are actively seeking out the voices of the people that utilize their products, right? It shouldn't have to take a mistake for a company like Starbucks to come back and create a t-shirt to somewhat appease people from boycotting them, right? All these companies making these statements show that there is power in the Black dollar, and we need to refocus how we are spending our money so that we're sustaining our own communities, because we're making a lot of people very rich. But what are we doing to really enrich our own communities? So thank you so much for your responses there. I know that the reason why I really wanted to have Yasmin on is because she works directly with children through her organization, the Hustlers Guild. And I kind of want to get a perspective about what you're currently doing in DC to help instill that change in our youth today.
Right. So actually we're in Brooklyn, we're in Harlem, Boston, as well as DC. But a big part, just to kind of go off of a statement that you just made as far as the corporate front of it, I think that people fight this battle within many motions, right? So you have people that are actually physically outside disrupting the peace of everyone else, as they should be disrupted. People are upset, so you got to feel it too. And then you have the corporate aspect of it, and that's what organizations like myself come in, and we hold them accountable for that little blanket statement that you thought was cute and nice put together. Yeah, that's cool for everybody else outside who don't know, but I'm a community organization that work with corporations on a day-to-day, so I really need to see what initiatives that you're standing by, what you're going to pilot, and then how can I help weigh in, because I already know what the diversity and inclusive side of your organization looks like. Nothing. So what that says is that there's a corporate fight that is going on as well, and organizations like ourselves, and then you have people that are doing the political side of things too, that are actually shaking up stuff, say, hey, this legislation does not make sense, this policy does not make sense, it's lopsided. How can we bring this back to be more inclusive to everyone? So with our students, what we do is we sit our students down, because a lot of times we tend to overlook how intelligent they actually are. We sit them down and say, listen, right? If you're on Snapchat, you got your J's or whatever shoes that you got, you're listening, you're streaming, you hold the power, right? Stop streaming and stop getting onto these apps and start tweeting and doing all this stuff, and see how much these organizations want to try to reach out to you. So what we do is we say to our organization, say, hey, if this is your group of constituents that you're trying to get something from, why aren't you giving them jobs? Like, what is the actual pipeline behind this looks like? And then we allow our students to be vocal about that stuff once we put the corporations in front of them to ask them those tough questions. What does internships for someone from my ward look like, or from my division look like, or for HBCUs look like, or for junior colleges look like, and not necessarily always the Ivy League? What does trade look like for students that come from these kind of backgrounds like myself? So we empower our students from an educational standpoint so they can understand how these corporations need to be held accountable for, because you're the one who drive the billion-dollar organizations in fashion, in tech, in hip hop, and you need to know that. Until we start empowering them from that sense, they would never understand how much power they have and actually how to move forward from that. So we tell our parents, stop telling your kids to put down their phone. Tell them how to use the phone when they have it in their hand. Tell them how to use Google. Tell them how to use the encyclopedia, how to look up stuff. Do not detach them from technology, because what you're doing is that you're then increasing a dent there. So we have started 6 weeks of virtual sessions from a social and emotional learning standpoint to support our high school kids. And then we did post-college readiness for our college students. And we had corporation hiring directors come in and sat down with students for about an hour each a week and go over like what jobs they could be looking for. And I also wanted the corporation to talk about, now that we're in the pandemic, talk to my students about what skills they need to know to work remotely. Okay, tech companies, my kids ain't got technology. So how you trying to act? Like, what are you trying to do to bridge this gap for this statement? The statement is cute. The Black is cute with the white font. However, ... what else are you going to do to that? Because we know where you're trying to get your money from. You're trying to get it from these hub and opportunity zones that you bank on. But what are you doing for them? So that's what we do as an organization. We hold them accountable. We like the accountability police. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You know, NAACP, I'm a picket sign shorty to the day I die. So it's just on the corporate front this go round. But before, they used to get that smoke when I was outside. But now it's a little different, just a teeny bit.
And like, I love what you're doing currently. The thing that has been a little disheartening for me in all of this, because I've been out there protesting, I've been in the workplace, you know, trying to educate people in the workplace. I work for corporate America, right? So like, we're doing all of these things behind the scenes. And then I see major corporations donating to huge organizations that aren't necessarily giving back to our people on the ground level, right? And so with an organization like yours, where you may not have the same platform as the NAACP or some of these other organizations, how can someone get involved? How can someone donate to a business like yours or to an organization like yours? Because we know what you're doing is directly impacting people every single day.
Right. So I would say for anyone that's working in like a city area, if you're interested in working with students, like, you can always ask your local district of a list of all their vendors and partnerships. It's public information, and see who are those small organizations that are working with the students on the day-to-day. And like, I agree, a lot of these corporations are given to like the huge, like the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club, and there's like $2, $3, $4, $5 million over there, but they don't know that you can give $20,000 to like a mom and pop kind of nonprofit organization, and they will stretch it. And a lot of the times, I think, going back to like the equity versus equality, is that people have to understand is we drive so many students, right? And a lot of corporations will give you pushback, and they're gonna say, well, we just gave $5 million to the YMCA. Why should we give you $20,000? Because this $20,000 can stop 10 students from generational poverty, right? And so when you look at it from that standpoint, instead of you doing something cute for 5,000 kids that may not even strike one of them to change to do something, you actually can give $20,000 to help an organization get kids out of a mentality of generational poverty, and then it also changes them. So I also tell you, like, the Hustlers Guild, like, we exactly what we do. We hustle, we're guild, we're crew. So however you want to, you know, market and look at it, like, we out here trying to do what we got to do. Like, we pulling organizations under our branch too, who don't have the access and the resources or the savviness to sit down with these corporations and give them that pushback, who understand their language, who could talk how they talk and move within a room. Like, you know, like Jay said, you got to learn how to move within a room of vultures. Like, this is what we do. Like, we live, we breathe hip hop, but we also know how to cut it off, especially all of us coming from the White House, and we know how to talk the language that they talk. And like, you cannot fool us. Like, we already know what's up. We've been on that side of the table, so you're not going to sit here and tell us anything. We just not, that's not us. That's not how we roll. but look towards those organizations that you see people sharing on Facebook, like we having a family day. Go show up to those family days, like donate some stuff out of your house, whether it's like books, socks, hats, coats, anything that you could possibly think of. Even some pro bono work can help a lot of these organizations push forward, because like we be rocking on a shoestring budget just because we know how it is to like hustle off of that kind of stuff. And like it goes a lot more further than a lot of these huge corporations that get those $1 million grants for whatever they be doing with it. I don't know, because I ain't never have a $100 million grant, you know what I'm saying, come my way, but I can tell you how we could rock out with it, you know what I'm saying? If I could make 5,000 work, let me tell you I could do with $1 million, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. No, I'm totally with you. And so one thing that stood out to me is a lot of people don't understand the politics behind corporate America, right? We raise our children to believe that if you do your best, if you're the smartest person in the room, if you're the most talented person in the room, then they can't tell you no. And that's not true. That's not true. Anybody who's been in corporate America can tell you that you can be the most qualified, early, on time, best prepared person in the room, and the job will still go to Jessica because Jessica's white, or because Jessica knew how to play the game behind the scenes. Like, it's not always about the numbers on the board, it's about what you're presenting behind the scenes. And I think organizations like yours are really important because it gives kids that perspective. Like, we can't coddle our kids the same way that other kids are coddled because we don't have that opportunity. And it sucks to think about, but it's important for us to be upfront and honest with our children so that they don't become adults who are told yes their entire lives, and then when they're finally told no, they don't know what to do with it. They give up. They feel like the system is rigged and they don't move forward. So I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in on that. Thank you so much, Yasmin. We really appreciate your perspective. And I definitely want to make sure that we post information on how people can get involved with your organization. So if you want to, kind of give us some insight into that, I definitely want to make sure that people can get involved. So outside of like education, like obviously everything that we're talking about is pretty heavy, right? Like the past few weeks have been heavy weeks. Like people have taken time off of work. People are, getting out there and protesting. And I think a really large part of the movement right now is the fact that with this global pandemic going on, there's a lot of us that aren't working right now, right? So we have the time to be engaged, to get involved. And sometimes that can be very overwhelming. It can be very consuming of our hearts and spirits. And I think that a big thing that the Black community doesn't talk about too often is mental health. So we have Jasmine here, who's a mental health professional, to actually guide us through some steps that we can take on a day-to-day basis to better cope with what's going on today.
Thank you. So, before we really get into what we can do to cope with everything going on, I think it's just kind of important that we know what the statistics are. Because I'm familiar and people in the field are familiar, but people outside don't really know and may not think that mental health really matters. But 1 in 5 adults in the US have a mental illness, with 1 in 25 reporting a serious mental illness, which is really a mental illness that's so debilitating that an individual really can't perform certain aspects of their daily living independently. 16% of Black individuals have a mental illness, and people with untreated mental illnesses are 16 times more likely to be killed in a law enforcement encounter. So, being able to know how your mental health is and being able to manage it can ultimately save your life if you do end up interacting with the police. So, some of the most prevalent mental illnesses right now are depression and anxiety. But I also did want to highlight post-traumatic stress disorder because, what we're living through right now and what we've been living through is traumatic. Like, it's very traumatic, having live streams and all this social media and all this access to watching individuals who look like you, who could be your mom, who could be your dad, your brother, your sister, get murdered. And then just having like all the details of their entire life, or even having them sort of villainized or painted as criminals, and seeing that their lives don't matter, or seeing that there's really no consequences for the individuals who took their life. All of that is traumatic. So, I mean, I do want to just talk about some of the signs and symptoms of these mental illnesses so you can recognize them in yourself, recognize them in your peers as well. As far as depression goes, a big one is change in appetite, weight loss, loss of interest in activities that, you typically find pleasure in, changes in sleep pattern, a persistent sad or empty mood, feelings of guilt, worthlessness, or hope, or thoughts of suicide and or suicide attempts. As far as anxiety disorder goes, there are tons of anxiety disorders, generalized panic disorders, phobia, social anxiety, but the main thing they all have in common is that there's really just a persistent feeling of fear or worry in situations that might not necessarily call for it. So that manifests itself in emotional or physical ways. Some of the physical are, racing heart, sweating, tremors, headache, an upset stomach. Some of the emotional are just really a strong sense of dread, feeling tense or jumpy, and really just anticipating the worst or danger. And with PTSD, I know a lot of people outside of the mental health community think that PTSD really only affects, veterans who've seen war, but that's not necessarily the case. It can really affect anyone who's been exposed to trauma, and exposure doesn't mean just directly experiencing it yourself. It can be witnessing it in person, learning about trauma, from a close family member or friend, or even just being exposed to the details of a traumatic event. So symptoms look different for that in different cases, but for the most part, people have intrusive symptoms. So they might have flashbacks or distressing dreams. They might have avoidance symptoms. So they might try to totally avoid anything associated with that trauma. So people, places, they might even repress details related to the trauma. You might have increased arousal symptoms where, again, you can't sleep, can't eat, that kind of thing. And negative cognition, such as negative beliefs about yourself, beliefs about others or the world, or even blaming yourself for the trauma. So, what we can do, the main thing I want to talk about is just the 3 A's, which are assess, acknowledge, and act. So assess, you're really checking in with yourself, doing a lot of self-reflection. You're asking, how do I feel today? Do I feel different than I did yesterday? Do I need a day off of work? Do I need a mental health day? Have I eaten today? And look for some of those signs and symptoms of mental illnesses that we discussed just a second ago. If you have energy, you can also check in with others, ask your friends how they're feeling, how they're doing. And when you are talking to them and asking them that, you really want to make sure that you're practice listening without inserting your own opinions, because that's important. People need to be listened to. Again, want to look for the signs and symptoms of the mental illnesses we discussed earlier. Next step in that AAA model is to acknowledge. A big thing to acknowledge is that some things are out of our control, right? So you want to focus on the things that you can control and make adjustments to those things if necessary. Want to acknowledge that not everyone reacts to things the same way. Your reactions aren't wrong, and neither are the reactions of your peers, right? So just because you're out protesting doesn't mean that your friend who's not protesting doesn't care or doesn't feel traumatized by what's going on. They might just be processing it differently, right? Or they might just be totally off social media, not wanting to even be re-traumatized by that, and that's okay. Like I said, their reactions are valid and yours are as well. So to act, the biggest thing you want to do is get support. So that's not just getting support from a mental health professional, that's also, talking to your friends and family, really getting to talk to someone who shares that kind of lived experience, who can really relate to what you're going through and what you're experiencing. Another huge thing to do is to take a step back. I like to say take a few hours each day, or even a few days a week if you can, to totally disconnect from social media and the news, to give yourself time to breathe. You want to practice self-care, but not even doing the most, really just doing self-maintenance, making sure that you're eating every day, making sure that you're sleeping 6 to 8 hours a day, going outside once a day if you can, or more, exercising each day or every other day. You also want to do things that relieve stress and do bring you happiness. So, that looks like a number of different things to different people. It could be exercising, painting, listening to music, really whatever makes you happy is what you want to do. Also want to set and maintain boundaries, which is huge. If you have people who are the All Lives Matter crowd just commenting on all your stuff, just go ahead and block them. You don't have to expend your energy to explain something to people over and over again. You really don't have to. Google is free, promise, they'll be okay. Another thing you can do is just start having open and honest conversations, with your family members, with your friends about mental health. Because one of the biggest barriers to Black people specifically seeking treatment for mental illnesses, or even, just talking about mental health, is the stigma around it. A lot of people view, mental illness as a sign of weakness, or not even having mental illness, but just wanting to talk to someone else or get support from outside the family as something that's just taboo. And that's not the case. So we really need to normalize just talking with our friends, family members, and everyone about our mental health and how we can improve it.
I think those are all really great action items. I know that during the global pandemic that we're all still facing right now, like mental health has been something that everyone's been more focused on, but also like I think that with being locked in the house, with feeling like the world is falling apart around you, some of these coping mechanisms can be unhealthy. And I know, like, Terri, you work directly with people who have unhealthy coping mechanisms. So, like, what are some of the ways that we can kind of determine whether or not our coping mechanisms are healthy versus unhealthy?
I think, within the realm of substance abuse, if you don't know, we're going to go with, if you're drinking now to escape anything, you know that's an unhealthy coping mechanism. There's things that you can use. You see that a lot of people, especially we're in DC, and marijuana is decriminalized. It's not legal, but it is decriminalized. And I want everybody, of course, to know the difference, because there's a lot of states. It's very few states where it's legal. It's only 2 states, and it's legal in those states. It's decriminalized in most states. If you're using marijuana or using any substance to cope throughout the day, you have to have it in the morning. You have to have it in the evening. That goes for caffeine. That goes for cigarettes. You smoking, you're vaping. That's an unhealthy coping mechanism. That's something that you like Jasmine just spoke about, the anxiety, the depression, it's overstimulation. You need to maybe think about, okay, hey, if I'm going to use marijuana, I'm going to try to use it medicinally, then you need to limit it. If you're taking anxiety meds, don't mix your anxiety meds with marijuana or any other drugs. You want to be diligent about how you're coping with different things. Some different coping mechanisms and resources that I would suggest people use. We're really big on social media. A lot of places that I like to look for, if I'm going online, they have therapy for Latinx people, therapy for Black women. You can just look, Therapy for Black Girls, it's called. You've got a Black therapist podcast. Listen to some podcasts, Therapy for Black Men, Brown Girl Therapy, Flora Mind. There's a variety of different avenues to get therapy, to get help. If you feel like you have to use a substance to kind of just get away, then you know that you have an issue and you now need to speak to somebody. Overstimulation is a big thing right now. Like you said, Jasmine kept talking about, you're seeing everything. It's all coming at you. And it's way too rampant. Stop the nonstop scrolling. Give yourself a time limit on your social media. If I'm going to get on there for 20 minutes at a time, then I need to put the phone down so that I'm not over inundated with so much trauma. Jasmine made a perfect point. Serving in the Navy and seeing so many things and then coming out, you're still Black. You still have all the same problems. So now if we're going to compound military PTSD along with PTSD because I'm Black and American, I now have to face these other issues constantly. It's a lot of trauma. And we don't think about those traumas because it's a daily thing that we've been dealing with for 40 plus years. I don't think about the fact that when I go outside, it's a constant thought that I may get shot by the police. So these things are now so ingrained with us that we deal with anxiety and this overstimulation of, okay, am I going to live or die constantly? God forbid, if you're in a city where you're seeing this violence a lot more than maybe a rural area, you need to have therapy. Everybody says that all the time. Therapy is for everybody. Therapists have therapists for a reason. So I cannot understand why, as a layperson, why I would not have a therapist. That's the biggest thing. And I also have to put out that number one thing, do not use synthetic marijuana. It's absolutely terrible for anybody. If you've got to get some reefer, get you some regular reefer. Don't get you none of the new stuff. I'm sorry, I had to take it back to reefer, but it's horrible for our bodies. And we're seeing way too many young people in the military, young people in school, and they keep using the synthetic marijuana, and it's chemically changing your body. It cannot be overstated enough that is the worst thing to do. If you got to get some marijuana, you have to have some weed, get you some regular weed. Do not get the synthetic stuff. So that's my take on that.
Well, we appreciate your take, Terri. I mean, we've touched on a lot of topics today. We're really excited to be able to start having conversations like this, obviously. The reason why we even started this platform was so that we could really come up with strategic, concrete steps in order to make change. I think everyone here has come up with really great ideas that we can all utilize moving forward. I know that there's probably going to be a lot of people in your inboxes, in your DMs, asking you questions about what they can do. So it's so nice to know that you guys are all open to receiving those questions and answering. And so I just want to thank you all for taking the time today, this Sunday, to have these conversations with us. We plan on having many more conversations. We want to talk about topics like healthcare, police brutality. There's a few other things that we want to talk about for sure. I definitely want to thank everyone that was able to help put this together, specifically Vipla and Kamani Anthony and Erica Waller. They were really integral in actually getting this group of people together to talk about things that are so important. So before I let you guys go, I wanted you to kind of give us our final notes. If you have anything else that you wanted to add, this is definitely your time.
I'll go first, and I will say burn it all. That's it. Oh my God.
I'll just say real quickly, I just think this is so important. Kind of what Mark was saying, as well as Jack and Yasmin chimed in. I think it's important that before, we've done protests, right? And I think it's definitely important and it's needed. But I feel like for the first time in my life, I've seen so many cultures come together to try to lift voices for change. And I think protests need to continue, but I do think that there needs to be something ahead to say, okay, now that we're having America's attention, now what do we want? What do we do? And how do we move forward and how do we navigate that? And later, I know another time, there'll be a chance to talk about legislation, and how does that work? Because now that we're at undeniable volume, I'm encouraged to see things like this, what More Than a Protest is doing, so that we can educate and really show how to navigate forward through, getting from the mayor to the governor to the Congress, a bill and getting it passed so that that becomes law. And then we have some specific steps when there is some police brutality that they're really held accountable. So I'm just honored to be here with all of you and really want to have a vision of how we're going to go forward now that we have the volume that's undeniable.
I have two things. Number one, I recommend this book, The Blueprint for Black Power, Amos Wilson, legendary thinker. And I'd also say this is a question about agency. And what I mean is that who are we and who are we going to become, individually and as people. And this is a time to begin to assert one's personhood and one's peoplehood as a people, for us to begin to actually take up space in this country. If 10% of Black people say we're not going to vote unless these things are met, then, or we're going to vote this way or that way, 10% swings elections in just about every place you go. So the question becomes, instead of being passive receivers of white supremacy, we need to be more active and more embodied in our resistance against it, because it needs our complicity in order for it to succeed.
All right, so a few things. Number one is use your gifts. I oftentimes say use your gifts, right? We spoke previously, everyone is not gonna march, but use your gifts. Some of you are writers, some of you are thinkers or planners or organizers. Some of you have this technology thing down pat. Some of you are very creative. Some of you are in labs. Some of you are in governments. Some of you are in education. Use your gifts. There's no one way to protest. No one has the carte blanche. Nobody has the monopoly as to how you should protest, but do something. And to Derreck's point, when you do something, then what is the action plan? And we've all kind of spoke to that. What do we do after? How do we use this momentum? How do we use this energy to ensure change? Because we are at a paradigm shift, man. So hopefully see how that translates into the future. Keep the pressure on. However you feel fit, keep the pressure on. We'll do our job motivating, inspiring, and mentoring, but we need all of you to do the same. And like I said, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's energy, just make sure you do that. And finally, to Jasmine's point, mental health in our community historically has been subpar, has been, ridiculed, has been, stigmatized. And the reality of it is, man, sometimes I need a debrief. Listen, I know the perception, and I do a lot of my research on Black masculinity. And, we're supposed to be so macho and tough, but we get weary too. We break down. And when you break down, sometimes you need somebody objective who don't really know you to kind of let you pour out your soul a little bit. So please, man, I know, many folks are religious, respect, do that route as well, but do not minimize the significance and importance of mental health in our community. And everybody else, follow me on social media, come holler at me. I love the debate, man.
I would just have to add that, your feelings are valid, and I would hope that you all seek therapy if you need it.
Thanks, Jasmine.
So for those who don't know what to do with themselves, I have a few options for you. One, you could donate to organizations like myself at the Hustlers Guild on Instagram, or follow us on thehustlersguild.org. $10, $5, however you feel, whatever the Lord leads your pockets, we will take it, and we be making that money work. Okay. For the other ones who may not have the finances to do so, you can always help by educating people. And that's people like allies or something like that, just kind of like debunking these myths that are out here, and being a little bit more self-aware of yourself and of others as well. Practice empathy. Everyone is not bad. Everyone is not good, but please practice and understand the balance of empathy. And for those who are outside, not rioting, but protesting and being very vocal about how they feel and how they've been feeling, do it with care, hydrate. It's a long road, and it's not going to be something that is very instant, and people are paying attention to those who are protesting, and that is the front line of actually getting stuff done while we're working the 9-to-5 work of this. So just stay strong in this and hydrated, and all reasons are valid. Don't let nobody tell you that they not, because they are valid as crap. That's all I got to say.
And stay hydrated. Let's all drink our water, because it's hot out there. And we need to continue to have this beautiful skin that we have. No, but thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate every single one of your input. I know that we have gotten some questions now. And I know that we're about to wrap this thing up. So I think what we're going to do is open up these questions on our platform. So you guys are either following us on Instagram or on Facebook. I would love it if some of my panelists could chime in and answer some of these questions that are coming up in our comments. Feel free to be your 100% true self, because that's what we're promoting here. And again, thank you so much for joining us this Strategic Sunday. My name is Julasha Simpson. I've had a great time with you all, and I hope you have a wonderful night.